Hi, it's Phil Turner from Timeform, looking ahead at the TV racing this weekend, and it's a cracking weekend of jumps race. It really does come at thick and fast. Some really good racing at Sandown. Obviously, Altior's reappearance, bidding to win the Tingle Creek again, and a cracking renewal of the Henry VIII just earlier over the same course and distance. To be honest, those races are probably they're good enough for me to watch. I can't see an obvious betting Rick in any of them, so I'll be watching those. Same applies to some of the racing on Sunday, and the Peterborough Chase is a really good renewal of that. And there's a cracking card over in Ireland that punches down probably the best race of the whole weekend is the John Durkan, and Timeform's highest rated chase at the minute. Chaconpour Soir returns in a race at Cork. I believe Billy Nash, our Irish correspondent, will be talking you through the Irish racing on Sunday tomorrow at some point. So look out for Billy's preview of a fine card there. And I'll go for the easy pickings over in Aintree instead, with the two races over the national fences, which can be a bit of a minefield, but hopefully we'll be able to sort of point you the way a few sort of bigger price ones, which might sort of give you run for the money. And we'll start off in the Beach Chase, and this is a strong looking renewal, but last year's was a strong renewal as well, which brings us on to Walk in the Mill, who is a real course specialist. I mean, the modified fences, there's no doubt they're a lot easier to jump than they used to be. But at the same time, you're still coming up with your regular course specialist, and Walk in the Mill is very much one of those. He's won the last two renewals of this race, and he was fourth in the Grand National a couple of years ago. And he brings very strong form to the table. And in a way, it's a bit different than you'd normally expect in a scenario like this, because a horse bidding for a hat-trick in a race, you would normally think, well, yes, we know he handles the course, and he's got a lot going for him in that regard for previous experience. But normally, they're probably handicapped up to the hilt when they're bidding for a hat-trick in the race. And I actually don't think that applies to Walk in the Mill. I think you can argue that he's very, very competitively handicapped, because last year's race worked out so well. There was two or three big winners came out of it in the following months, and Walk in the Mill kept his powder dry over hurdles, that he arrives here, ahead of his mark in a way. I mean, just think about last year's runner-up, Kimberlite Candy, who reopposes again tomorrow. I mean, Walk in the Mill is actually £8 better off this time around, and he beats him. So he's got a lot of things going in his favour. The stable's re-emerging in a bit of form after a quiet spell, and Walk in the Mill always needs his first run back. And his first run back this year at Ascot was a lot better than his first run back last year. So he ticks loads of boxes. And to be honest, he probably would have been the bet if I'd been recording this 24 hours ago, when you could get him around 7-8 to 1. He's now a more realistic price. He's been sort of backed into 5 to 1 favourite. I still wouldn't put anyone backing him at that. I think you'll get a really solid run for your money. But I just think it might be worth seeking a bit of value elsewhere. And I'm going for a bit of a long shot in Jet, who's towards the head of the weights. He's having his first run in the Whaley with Sam Whaley-Cohen on board. They bought him last year to have a tilt at the Grand National. Obviously, that was called off. But he's an interesting runner on two counts here. I mean, obviously, the main one is that Sam Whaley-Cohen has got the best record over these fences of anyone riding at the minute. Now, why is that? It's not because he's a better jockey than most of the rest. I think he's got more time in his hands being an amateur, and I just think he's really studied these races for decades and decades of videotapes, and he just worked out where to be. He's nearly always in the right position in these races. It pays to be handy, particularly at this time of the year when they run over a narrower course to preserve the ground for the spring. So he's nearly always in the sort of first 4 or 5, giving his horse a really good sight of the fences. And yes, he's, because of his dad buying lots of good horses, he's ridden lots of good horses over these fences, but he's also been placed several times on sort of fairly unpromising mounts. So he really knows his way around here. And if Jet takes to the fences, which is a bit of an if because it's an unknown quantity, and he's a bit of a quirky horse with an awkward head carriage, but if he takes to it, then you know he's going to be in the right place tactically, and he brings some very good form to the table. You go back and watch last year's Savills Chase and the Irish Gold Cup at Leopardstown. He's still banging contention in between the last two in both those races, and wasn't beaten all that far in the end. And he kept doing that in these great sort of big graded races last winter, that he did it so many times he couldn't be flattered on every single occasion. So, there's a lot of ability there when it can be channeled properly. And as I say, if he takes to it and he's sitting there prominent for most of the way, I think he could find this race very easy. Touchwood is normally a pretty sound jumper, and at around 22 to 1, I think that's a risk worth taking. And that looks good each way value in a good renewal. But even though he's an unknown quantity on the track, I think Jet's well worth trying at those odds. We'll move on to the shorter distance race, the Grand Sefton, which closes the card at Aintree. I think it's at 3:30, and there could be plenty of thrills and spills here, because it looks like there's going to be plenty of pace on. There's lots of sort of horses who like to be handy, and it's a big field as well. So you will want to be handy if possible, because I think there could be a fair few fallers and plenty of trouble in behind. And the way to go for me in this would probably be Springtown Lake of Philip Hobbs, who's teamed up well with Tom O'Brien, who's another jockey who's got a good record over these fences. He's won 3 times over them, and I suspect he'll have him in the first half dozen. And he's a horse who likes being up there, but he also he sticks at it pretty well, even when he looks like he's sort of beaten. He rallied well for second over the Malmo fences on his reappearance here, and he ran really well when winning at Warwick last year when reunited with O'Brien. I just think he could sort of knuckle down. You'll need to. It's going to be testing. They're probably going to have a good pace, and you've got the long running, and I think he'll have a better chance than most of hanging on in there, having been up with a pace. So at around 10 to 1, I think he's the way to go. And the other one, I'd say at a similar price, Sametigel of Paul Nicholls. He's had previous experience of the course. He was third in this race back in 2017, and he's just he's been there, seen there, done it kind of thing. He's running in veterans, but he's clearly retains much of his enthusiasm and much of his ability as well. And I think at those sort of odds, he's got a good chance of finishing in the money again. So those two will be Springtown Lake and Sametigel. And then finally, 2 at much shorter odds, but I think I still think they represent decent value. In the Many Clouds Chase, again at Aintree, we've got a small but select field. And I think Santini, he's a horse lots of people seem to like to knock, but he's got a very good record. He's always sort of finishing in the money. He's hardly ever finished. I think he's ever finished out the first 3 under rules. The only possible negative will be he was very, very ring rusty on his reappearance last year. A repeat of that wouldn't be ideal, because he's up against better opposition. But I just think he's a good bet. I think he's the best horse in the race. He's got 2 serious rivals, Frodon and Native River. I think he's a better horse and a stronger stayer than Frodon. Famous last word, but I think he is. And although I've got much respect for Native River, he's not getting any younger. The Tizard stable, it's still a little bit hit and miss, and I just think him being in the field means it will develop into the kind of tester stamina Santini will need. I think some of the sort of comments coming from the stable say, oh, they're not sure whether the course will suit. I think that'll be well overplayed. Aintree in this kind of ground with a good gallop is nowhere near as sharp a test as people make out. He won a big race over hurdles back in his novice hurdling days. I think he's around sort of 5, 6 to 4. I think that's a pretty decent price in this. I think, the Gold Cup runner-up, retain the faith of Santini. I think that's actually a good bet. And then finally, over at Sandown, the 3 o'clock, the London National. I'm staying low with my old friend Cloudy Glen. He did us a favour a few weeks back when winning at Fontwell on his reappearance. As hoped for, looking just a sort of totally more clued up individual than he did for much of his novice season last year. No, he's been raised £11 for that easy win, but he'd have won with the extra £11 that day. And although that's often a very simplistic way of looking at things, I think it's probably fair enough in this instance, because the chances are it could be a very similar type of race. It's another small field for the money, only the 7 runners, and much of them are the same type of runners as well. Quite exposed. He's very much on the up, and it's really all whether you can get him relatively well settled in a rhythm. And I just think he'll be too good for these. He's got Robbie Dunn on board, who's riding really well at the minute. He's had plenty of recent winners, and he's Touchwood normally is ideal on this type of horse. Very good on long distance chases, just getting them in a rhythm, nice and jumping. And as I say, he's a pretty short price, but I think he deserves to be. And I think it's a similar scenario to the race at Fontwanne, and he should be too good to win. So Cloud again for me. And then, so just to recap: Jet each way in the Beecher Chase, Springtown Lake and Sametagal in the Grand Sefton at Aintree. In the Many Clouds Chase, Santini to make a winning reappearance, and then our old friend Cloudy Glen in the London National at Sandown rounded off. Happy punting.